thanks for the presentation. This is a very new paper, and I'm very happy that I'm presenting this. Also, given the other two talks that have been given, because I think I will focus on something. Well, the two previous talks had a more global approach. I think I will have a very local, I will call it the micro approach. Hopefully I will be able to sort of interact with the other two speakers during the roundtable about this. I would be very interested. So as I said, I'm going to talk about the implementation challenge and what I will speak of as metalinguistic awareness. So the first part of this talk will be about the implementation challenge at what I call the micro level. So the pressing question posed by the implementation challenge is, to put it very bluntly, how do we get large linguistic communities to change concepts in the way advocated by conceptual engineers? And it is, I think, a shared opinion that conceptual change should begin from somewhere. It should begin from linguistic change, and particularly from meaning change. However, there are two significant obstacles which I think lie at the ground of the implementation challenge. One is a lack of epistemic control. We have insufficient knowledge of the complex of facts, events, and mechanisms that underlie meaning fixation and change. So we don't know enough about the, if you wish, the supervenience basis. And the other is lack of practical or operative control. So in light of this epistemic lack of insight, we don't know what to do to effectively bring about conceptual change. And it seems very difficult to do that, given that we don't know enough about that. Here are some answers that have been coming out in the recent literature. On the one hand, there are optimistic approaches, like, for example, Stefan Koch, who says, well, it's not true that we don't have control over meaning change. There is control that communities have. It's not direct control, it's what he calls collective long-range control over meaning change. James Ando recognizes the difficulty of implementation processes or projects. However, he gives a calculation-based argument to make the point that it is nevertheless worth engaging in conceptual engineering projects, especially those which would result in very large benefits, like changing society for the better or fighting climate change, even if there is a very low chance of success. And then we have, I think, a third type of answer, and I'm grouping together different authors here. I have papers by Mark Pinder, a paper by Jared Riggs, and a paper by Sigurd Joram, who I think all do something similar to each other. So what they do is they delimit what conceptual engineering can do, for example, to introducing new speaker meanings or modulate meanings where these meanings have context sensitivity features that relate to their context sensitivity. And they say, well, once we delimit what conceptual engineers can do, the implementation challenge looks less insurmountable. So we have somewhere to start. And I think that somewhere is what I want to call the micro level. It's the possibility to focus on what a single individual can do in their day-to-day communicative interactions to make a difference. And for example, Pinder and Joram as well would say, well, they can play with speaker meanings, or they can play with modulation of meaning where that is possible. So I think the third approach is sort of points towards an approach which is very local, very, I think also probably very modest, in that is an approach that looks at what single speakers can do, what is within their powers, let's say. So there are many things that I will say speakers can do, but there is right off the bat a difficulty at the micro level, which is the difficulty of having to do with interlocutors who are not receptive, indifferent, uncooperative, etc. Let's make an example about that. Suppose, and this is a very much a toy example, suppose I advocate for a change in the concept of think. I want to be able to say that machines think. So I go around and say things like, my computer is thinking, we should all say that computers think, and so on. What would it mean for me to encounter such uncooperative interlocutors? Well, my interlocutor may not understand me or take my utterance as just weird and ignore it. They may accept my usage in the current context, but fail to recognize my attempt to change the expression's meaning, and therefore just not replicate the usage in future contexts. Maybe they would even accept my usage in the current context and even replicate my usage as long as they're talking to me, but then forget about it in future contexts. In all these cases, I take it that my attempt as a single individual would be somehow undermined by the failure to cooperate of interlocutors, by the people who are on the receiving end of my implementation attempt. And this applies to the toy case with thinking, but I think it applies, and it probably applies in even more worrying ways to other attempts at generating meaning change, for example, with rape or sexual harassment. Failure to cooperate with the speaker and the attempt by the speaker to push the boundaries of meaning in these cases may be met or may have been met with this kind of lack of cooperativeness. So this, I think, tells us that an important condition of possibility for the implementation project of a conceptual engineer is that the implementer's interlocutors are suitably, what I will say, metalinguistically aware. This means that in a very rough and general way, I'll say more specific things afterwards, that a speaker is able to turn their attention to features of their own language, going from phonetics, morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics, and is able, if required, to regulate their own usage of language accordingly. Why should metalinguistic awareness thus characterize matter for implementation projects? I think lack of metalinguistic awareness, which is the kind of lack of cooperation that I was trying to describe earlier, makes implementation attempts fail in a very and particularly radical way. Compare the following two scenarios: a scenario where I try to use the word think, or I advocate for a different use of the word think, and I am met with indifference, lack of cooperation. So this is one scenario. The other scenario is a scenario where I am met with opposition. So my interlocutor is metalinguistically aware, is aware of what I'm doing, of my attempt, and they push back and they say, no, that's not what the word think. We shouldn't mean that way. We shouldn't mean that with that word. I take it that in these two scenarios, my attempt at implementing this meaning change would fail, but it would fail in two different ways. If I am met with indifference and lack of cooperation, it seems like I have less or even no chance to affect my interlocutor's uses much more than I already did. If the interlocutor is pushing back, but they are contending with me on my same level, let's say, I may have a little bit more hope to keep negotiating and perhaps persuade my interlocutor. So these are different failures. I think the failure that is owed to lack of metalinguistic awareness is more radical, is more worrying than the failure of someone who is met with opposition. It's normal that people may not agree with us, but that gives us a chance to contend on the same metalinguistic level with them, and that's different level of failing. Okay, so I promised that I would say more about metalinguistic awareness, and I want to say something about a little bit more detailed about the skills that the interlocutor of a conceptual engineer who is trying to implement meaning change might have, and that might favor the process of meaning change and concept change. So the first capacity is, I think, a capacity to issue descriptive judgments as to correctness, incorrectness, so to recognize which words are used in a semantically correct way, given the extant semantics or not. Second capacity is to acquire a normative perspective, to judge a use of correctness and incorrectness that is normative in flavor. So it's not about whether a use is correct, incorrect, or incorrect as a matter of fact. It is about whether the use is correct or incorrect, and whether that should tell us something or should guide us in any way in our future usages. I think also the capacity to take other speakers' word usage as paradigmatic is important, and also the capacity to choose or substitute words in accordance with paradigmatic usage. Then I think also a further level of skill would be the capacity to recognize the relation between use and meaning, whether standing meaning or speaker's meaning. I don't want to take a stance, and also the capacity to exploit one's own use in order to change meaning, whether it's speaker meaning. So these, I think, would be the sort of 6 main features that a metalinguistically aware interlocutor might have. I think they're not all equally important. I want to sort of subdivide these skills into 2 groups. The first group, which includes features capacities 1 to 4, I want to call it metalinguistic awareness proper. And sorry, I'm going back here. What's happening? Okay. And features 1 to 4, I think, are instances of what metalinguistic awareness is also in the realm of psycholinguistics. And I think there is a nice account of what metalinguistic awareness is that seems to be quite influential in the realm of psycholinguistics, which we could describe as a dispositional account. So it's not an account whereby we might sort of have these very occurrent and personal level states about what is right and what is wrong and what's paradigmatic and what it's not. But we might have a skill that is structured in a more dispositional way, and that is described by Piasek and Bouchard-Ryan as the capacity to solve metalinguistic problems, and which they subdivide into one analytic capacity, which is the capacity to analyze, words, sentences, which they call analyze knowledge, and a capacity to operate, to do something about it, to operate corrections and make changes, which they call cognitive control. These 2 aspects, when they operate in tandem, seem to sort of manifest a speaker's metalinguistic awareness in full. So I think there's a nice connection here between what we might want to require from someone who is metalinguistically aware in a process of conceptual engineering implementation and what we already have in other debates. As I said, I want to subdivide this list of 6 skills into 2 groups. The second group has to do with what I want to call meta-semantic awareness. It's about being aware of how use relates to meaning and how, well, one's own usages can contribute to meaning change. And I think meta-semantic awareness is, well, it's different than metalinguistic awareness. I think being meta-semantically aware implies that one is metalinguistically aware, so that one is sort of reflecting upon language, or that one is making language the focus of one's attention. However, that's, well, the other way around does not obtain. So being meta-semantically aware, so having this sort of naive meta-semantic theory, of course, doesn't need to be an internalistic or externalistic theory. It only needs to be this sort of rough grasp of the fact that, for example, accumulated use determines meaning as some sort of standing property of linguistic expressions. So I think being meta-semantically aware on top of being metalinguistically aware would greatly facilitate implementation in circumstances that are favorable. So talking to someone who is not only metalinguistically aware, so who is able to pick up on what's correct and incorrect, what should be used and not, is one thing. And talking to someone who is also grasping that there is a more diachronically extended project that extends beyond the present context and extends beyond the here and now is another thing. Of course, someone who grasps this sort of diachronic depth would be a better interlocutor for a conceptual engineer if they were on board with the proposed change. However, I think meta-semantic awareness would be a little bit too much to ask, because we already know, for example, from the work of Eugen Fischer, I think it was a paper that Manuel was referring to before, we already know that even in the presence of a metalinguistically aware speaker who is, let's say, consciously attempting to use language in a different way, it's very different, even for just cognitive reasons, to suppress, for example, certain characteristic or features of the dominant sense of some words. So if we're trying to engineer a meaning and to have people, pick up on that, if that new meaning requires not eliciting certain features that is very, very much natural to elicit or to, have in your mind when you speak or understand someone, that's going to require effort. And that's going to require effort even in the presence of, some sort of awareness of what we are doing. So if that is hard, I suppose that asking for what I was characterizing as meta-semantic awareness would be perhaps asking too much. We should be content with, being able to communicate to our interlocutors that a certain usage is wrong in a certain respect, and that there is another usage which is right in another respect, and that our own usage is to be taken as a paradigm from now on, without eliciting more, let's say, historically relevant considerations as to what will happen in the future and how this will affect society at large and so on. That's, of course, as I was saying, a very local and micro approach to the implementation effort. So far, I've been talking about this idea of metalinguistic awareness, and now I want to sort of survey a number of possible strategies that might be enacted by someone who is engaged in a project of implementation. So I will review a variety of methods that I think that could help. The goal of each method is that of raising metalinguistic awareness in one's interlocutor while causing what I will call belief disruption in one's communication. Disruptions here include misunderstanding, talking past each other, misattributions of speech and attitude content, uttering falsehoods and nonsense in the current language. I will distinguish between disruptions and interruptions. I think interruptions, namely breaks, coinciding with silence or with another interjecting conversation, will not count as disruptions unless they cause the sort of undesirable phenomena. And disruptions will be, by and large, be considered undesirable. So what is one possible strategy? I think there is a spectrum with respect to this relationship between the risk of disruption and the benefits of raising metalinguistic awareness. And I want to explore the possible spectrum of these strategies. So the first, at one end of the spectrum, I think we can find a proposal that has been advanced by Rachel Starkin, who coins the term disruptive communicative interventions. What are they? So they are, let's say, contributions to a conversation where a speaker uses a word as if the word means A, and also interprets others' uses of the word as if they meant A. And the speaker treats the word as meaning A, even though they don't believe that means A. So they are, consciously deviating from the current semantics of the word. And the interlocutors of the speaker are also not fully aware that the speaker is speaking or interpreting in this way. So it's disruptive because, well, in some contexts, this can cause, well, frictions between different usages of one word, and it can cause indeed miscommunication. Starkin makes the example of woman. She says, well, if I were to try and use the word woman from now on, according to Haslinger's proposed definition, this would be a disruptive intervention because in some context it might clash with other people's statements and expression of point of view. So the risk is the risk of miscommunication, of talking past each other, of failures in the attribution of belief contents, and so on. The benefit is this idea of a shock therapy, of raising this idea of metalinguistic awareness in a shocking way. And Starkin is very clear that this is worth doing, the risk is worth taking when it comes to engendering important changes in the way people speak and think. And I don't have any qualms with that. I just think that this is, well, one end of the spectrum of the possible strategies, and that it should be somehow sort of pondered in each single context, whether it would be beneficial relative to the features of that context. I think in what we may call high risk, high gain situations, that might be worth doing. In other situations, it might be less fruitful. And here I have an example, imagining, comparing two different scenarios where I, who am engaged in this sort of effort of changing the meaning of woman, I utter something like, Angela Merkel is not a woman. And suppose I'm speaking with my mother, who is a sort of conservative lady in her 60s, and that doesn't really, produce any fruitful result when it comes to being conducive to a meaning change. I might just be met with a blank stare or some sort of dismissive comment, perhaps. So that would be, perhaps a context where it might not be worth, engaging in this kind of disruptive communication. But if I were to post this sentence on a Twitter account, maybe there will be a higher risk of being misunderstood, but maybe there will be also a higher chance that someone would take this as provocative and would actually think about my use of the word and actually perhaps retweet that or discuss this in some context of their own. So all I'm saying is, well, this is perhaps one strategy, and that's it's going to be a delicate issue whether this strategy is worth using in one context. So let's move to another possible strategy that I think is a little less disruptive, which I call semi-metalinguistic intervention. What does it consist of? It consists in a speaker, first of all, avoiding using a certain word in all the contexts where this is possible or permissible. So avoiding on the one hand. On the other hand, when another speaker uses that word that the person is avoiding, correcting them by rephrasing the utterance, employing metalinguistic negation, perhaps, or even just engaging in fully metalinguistic explanation. And maybe in other cases, when speakers fail to use the word, flag their choices and maybe praise them. So one example that I had in mind was with the word depressed. I might decide not to use the word depressed outside of contexts that are not about, clinical depression. And I might engage in correction of people who say casually things like, oh, I feel so depressed today. And so that might be a semi-metalinguistic intervention because I would be omitting several usages of this word. And I think one risk has to do exactly with my omissions. Why am I omitting the word? From the point of view of my interlocutor, this is an ambiguous situation. Is it just by chance or is it intended? And if it's intended, why? So all of this is not explained and is not transparent to my interlocutor. But the benefit might be that even if I don't raise metalinguistic awareness, I set a virtuous pattern of examples. So people witness me using the word depressed only when clinical depression, diagnosed depression is relevant, and that might set a good precedent. So I might be a good example for people. Okay, so the next strategy is even, I think, less disruptive. I call it fully metalinguistic intervention. So it's about going metalinguistic, fully metalinguistic in all the usages that one engages in. So I use a relevant word and I add a number of metalinguistic qualifications. And when people either use it or fail to use it, I also go metalinguistic and I correct them, or I praise their usage or lack of usage. One example is, a possible example is rape. I might sort of consciously engage in using the word rape by accompanying it with a whole host of metalinguistic qualifications to be fully clear about my sort of intention. And also I might either correct or praise people who fail to use the word when it's appropriate or who use it when it is appropriate. I think one risk here is that by going fully metalinguistic every time, we interrupt the flow of the conversation, and this might be a problem if it leads to disruptions. So if it leads to, losing the thread of the conversation, failure to understand each other, failure to appreciate sort of the arguments and information that has been conveyed during the exchange. One benefit is that, well, that of clearly shifting the conversation focus from the subject matter of discussion to the expressive devices. And this is as clear as it could be. Finally, another set of possible moves is what I call object level interventions, which are about communicating at the object level and not deviating from the semantics of the current language and not engaging in metalinguistic speech. So I might communicate at the object level about, for example, the clinical characterization of depression or the legal definition of rape. This would plausibly have the effect of having my interlocutor associate different definitions, different sets of information to a word. Or I might, again, at the object level, openly speak about how metalinguistic awareness is important to, for example, meaning change. Again, here there might be risks and benefits. The main benefit would be that of not not generating or not plausibly generating any disruptions. Which strategy is the best? I really don't want to, commit to any strong claim here, but I'll say this: there is an ethical considerations, perhaps. Do we as speakers owe maximum clarity regarding our metalinguistic views and intentions? So do we owe being upfront about what we want to do metalinguistically? If yes, I think there are a couple of strategies that are, let's say, ideal, like the fully metalinguistic intervention or even the object level interventions, and other strategies which are less transparent, less upfront regarding metalinguistic intentions and are perhaps to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, like, for example, the disruptive communicative interventions that Sturgeon talks about, or the semi-metalinguistic intervention. So there are two general problems, and I'll just try to be quick here. One has to do with having the standing or power. So does the conceptual engineer or the implementer have the necessary standing or power, the necessary authority in each of these micro-level interactions to be listened to and to have people take their usages as paradigmatic? Another issue has to do with the lack of observability of metalinguistic awareness. This is something that an implementer may fail to witness in many instances. I think these are general problems that any single actor in complex processes of change would encounter, like changing people's eating habits. I don't always have the authority and the standing and the power to affect how, I don't know, my friends or my family members will eat or choose what to eat. I can try to persuade them, but it's not clear that I will succeed. It's not even clear that I will witness them changing such habits. However, if I failed to obtain these effects, I could not reasonably be blamed because I think I would have put my best effort. And I also think that these risks should not deter me from trying to do this. Okay, so to sum up, I started out with the implementation problem. I've tried to focus really on the micro level, what we can do in single conversations as single speakers. I've mentioned metalinguistic awareness as an important background condition, and also I've mentioned some potential strategies that could be adopted by the implementer who is attempting to bring about meaning change. Thanks a lot.